I'm your host, Stefan Love, and today I'm going to be talking about whether the NFL shouldn't or should implement a draft lottery. Here are the reasons why it shouldn't be implemented. Reason number one, tradition. Under this current iteration of the NFL draft, it has always been worst team gets number one pick, and it goes from worst to best. Is there really a change needed? No, I don't think so. It's been working this way for over 40 years, and there's not really a need for change, I guess. Like, maybe you can convince me. I'll probably get into that in the next slide, but we'll see. The number two reason, the tinfoil hats. We live in a conspiracy filled world where like everything's a conspiracy. Recently in the NBA draft, the Dallas Mavericks, who had I think they had the overall. I don't think they had the overall worst odds, but they had very slim odds, and they somehow looked their way to the number one pick. And if you watch basketball, the Mavericks probably made the worst trade, probably in the history of American pro sports, and it involved trading Luka Doncic to the Lakers. There are a lot of people out there who think, oh well, the NBA convinced the Mavericks to trade Luka to the Lakers so they can in exchange for the number one pick. Which, if you sit down and think about it, that makes no sense because Cooper Flag has never played a second of basketball in the NBA. Luka is like far more marketable. Like he's probably like the most marketable young superstar in the league. And I use the quotation marks because the guy's been in the league for 7 years. And he's like, what, 26, 25 years old? So, like, it doesn't make sense. It's just, I think it was more so that it was just a dumb trade by the Mavs. But it's very hard to rig the lottery. As I said in the previous slide, it's ping pong balls. And if you think it's rigged, you can go look up the video on NBA.com. You can probably just Google NBA draft lottery recording, and it'll be like the first link up there. But the last reason is this: it may lead to more overall tanking amongst the league. Like, I'm not too enthralled with the NBA. Like, I only tune into it during the playoffs. But one thing that you commonly see NBA fans say who support the draft lottery is that, oh, it doesn't give incentives to teams who tank, or it doesn't give incentives to the team. Well, no, I said the right thing. It doesn't give incentives to teams who deliberately tank, which tanking doesn't really exist in my opinion. That's why I have the quotation marks. Like, from an on field or on the court standpoint, in the NBA's case, tanking does not exist. Those players are not going out there to lose games. It may exist from a front office point of view, but it doesn't exist from a player's point of view. But it will lead to like more teams from the front office saying, "Hey, we're gonna shut this guy down, put him on IR, so we can go from a 7% boost to a potential, I don't know, 8% boost of obtaining the number one pick." So that's like my main reason why I am against it. But let's get into the reasons why maybe it should be implemented. And that is this. And this really isn't something that would affect fans, but it would affect the owners across the league, and that is a revenue boost. More than likely, if the NFL ever implemented a draft lottery, it's going to be recorded on TV. It's going to be broadcasted on TV, maybe ESPN most likely, and and I'm going to tell you right now, that's going to get a minimum 10 million viewers, which is a lot of money. That's essentially a football game on Fox or CBS, just for people watching the reveal of who's going to get the number one pick. So that's reason number one. Reason number two, and I don't know if I should say this because I am a Packers fan, and we haven't really suffered from being very mediocre or being very bad. But in this case, I think it gives mediocre teams a chance at obtaining a very talented player. And by a mediocre team, I'm talking about like teams who are like constantly 7, 8, or 9 wins teams every year, like the Saints, or they constantly make the playoffs and they just get pounced in the first round, where they have a good enough roster to make the playoffs, but they don't have a good enough roster to go deep into the playoffs or make a playoff run. But like, what me saying this is kind of like what's the word I want to say? Me being sort of insensitive to like teams who like only win like constantly win like 4 games a year, teams who just suck every year. Mm, I don't know. I think it will give mediocre teams a bit of a chance to get a highly talented prospect. And the last reason is this: the chaos that will ensue. Could you imagine if a team barely misses the playoffs and they get the number one pick? And let's say, I don't know, let's just use the Kansas City Chiefs for example. Let's say the Chiefs barely missed the playoffs, and there's this highly talented prospect. Let's say a highly talented QB prospect. The Chiefs already have Patrick Mahomes. They can trade that pick away to get more inventory. Maybe they get more future draft picks. Maybe they get a key player from the team who had that number one pick to make their roster better. There would just be a lot of chaos that will ensue, and like me just being someone who's like a, I don't know, a devil's advocate who wants to watch from the sidelines just to watch everything erupt. It'll kind of be fun. I don't know. Maybe if I think about it, it probably wouldn't be fun, especially if the Packers are like affected by it. I don't know. But let's get into how it should work. So, in my opinion, it should not be like the NBA, where it's like where it's like the top four picks are up for grabs. I don't like that, especially in NBA, where like I don't personally think playing teams should be eligible for the draft lottery. I think it should only be eligible for like the top 10 teams, the teams who didn't make the playoffs. So like I don't think the playing team should be eligible. Or at the very least, I don't think a team who finishes 7th or 8th in their conference should be eligible for the draft lottery. But I don't know. That's just my opinion. I don't like it. Whatever. But this is how I think it should be work. This is how it should work in my opinion. It should only be for the number one pick. So if the worst team doesn't get the number one pick, the worst that they can pick in the draft is number two. And if you look at the last two drafts, you had CJ Stroud and Jaden Daniels. So like I think that's a very good safety net for the worst team in the league. But this is how I think the odds should be implemented. And I think the odds should only be effective for the three worst teams. And that is this: I think the worst team should have a 20% chance of obtaining the number one pick. That is around 200 combinations out of 1,000. I think the second worst team should have a 17.5% chance. That is roughly 175 combinations. And that is, and I think the third worst team should have a 12.5% chance of obtaining number one pick, and that is 125 combinations. So the three worst teams of the draft lottery of 18 teams, because remember, 18 teams missed the playoffs, 50% of the combinations will belong to the top three worst teams in the league, which I think is kind of fair because let's say if the third worst team wins the lottery, then the worst team in the league gets the second pick. If the second worst team in the league wins the lottery, then the worst team in the league will get the number one pick. And if it's the worst team who wins the lottery, then it just goes in your typical order. So that's how I think it should work. If you have any ideas, let me know down in the comment section. If you are for a lottery being implemented, of course. And let's get to my verdict. I personally think I would say no. If I was voting on the NFL, what is it, board of governors or at the owners meeting, I would vote no, but I could be persuaded. I think there are some aspects that I think would be fun, like the mediocre teams potentially getting the number one pick and getting like a highly talented QB. Like think about the Steelers getting Cam Ward this year. The Steelers have always been constantly known as a team that is like a quarterback away, or it's a team that couldn't fill the void for Ben Roethlisberger. I think mediocre teams could probably have success with this. I don't know, maybe this is just me sounding very spoiled because I'm a Packers fan and I've never lived to be I don't know, a Browns fan or whatnot. So maybe you guys have like a different perspective. So let me know in the comment section down below. Like and subscribe, please. This is my first ever video on this channel. And let me know your opinion. Should NFL implement a draft lottery or should they not implement a draft lottery? Goodbye.